forces that entered India. There are four forces that entered India from the west which prepared the way for reform movements in India. The English East India Company. The only interest that the East India Company had was trade. They took raw materials from India at very cheap rate to England and sold manufactured goods to people of India and elsewhere at very high prices. Thus, India was converted into an unexploitable market for the development of British industries. This resulted in cruel destruction of many of the cottage industries in India and robbed India of precious natural resources. People suffered from discouragement and unemployment. The company noticed that Hinduism had a strong hold upon the people. For the stability of their trade, they believed that it was necessary to patronize the religions of India. Therefore, they adopted three policies. First, a large number of temples were brought under their management. They advanced money both for rebuilding and repairing of temples. Salaries of temples officials were paid by them. Large sums of money were granted for sacrifices and festivals and for the feeding of the Brahmin priest. Government officials were required to attend Hindu festivals in order to show their interest in celebration. Second, the company opposed Christian missionary work. They refused to allow any missionary to settle in their territories. William Carey, the first British missionary to India, arrived in 1793, but he was not allowed to stay in British territories of India. Hence, he settled in Shirampur under the Danish flag. Many missionaries who landed in India were deported by the authorities. However, this policy of the company was reversed in 1813 by an act of the British Parliament. Third, the company refused to employ native Christians. Those who became Christians while in the army were expelled in Bengal. Many English believed that it is not wise to interfere with the religion and civilization of India. They thought it was impossible to produce any lasting influence on Hindu religion. For this, every attempt to introduce change would be bad for the people. Moreover, they were convinced that it would adversely affect their trade and administration of the land. For the same reasons, at this stage, many British people were not in favor of educating the Indians. The British government. Since a stable government and sound financial arrangements were necessary for the profitable commerce, the company had to undertake the administration of the country. It was during the last decade of the 18th century that the company was gradually transformed into a government. The conscience of British was gradually awakened, and they decided that India should be governed by them for the good of the people of India. The men who laid the foundation were Clive, Hastings, and Cornwallis. Thus, traders were transformed into administrators, living on a salary and strictly forbidden to make money by trading. By 1800, a large part of the country was already under British rule, and Lord Wellesley was busy bringing native princes within the scope of the British Empire by means of peaceful treaties. His policy was completed in 1849 when the last portion of India was added to the British Empire at the conclusion of the Second Sikh War. It is paradoxical but significant to note that in the beginning, Indian Army helped the company to gain territories in India. But when in 1857 there was a mutiny by the Indian army, it was put down immediately, and India was brought directly under the British Crown. The whole activity of the government during the period of 1828 to 1870 was one of the reform, which can be summarized in three categories. First, Banting felt that it was the duty of the government to prohibit the customs which were grossly immoral, though these were associated with religion. Second, recognition of human equality. It was decided that all should be equal before the law. This idea found practical impression in the employment of Indians in government services. Third, the place given to English language. The English language became the official language of India. All higher education was through English medium. Government opened schools and colleges. Medical colleges were also introduced. Universities were established in Calcutta, Bombay, and Madras. At the same time, vernacular language was not neglected. The result produced in India through the education were revolutionary. In 1843, an act was passed to render slavery illegal. As a result, many poor people acquired freedom from rich landowners. From 1870 to 1895, there was progress in the adaptation of British administration to the needs of India. A local self-government bill was passed by Lord Ripon's government with the purpose of educating the Indian people in self-government. In 1891, the Age of Consent Act was passed, which prohibited a husband from living with his child wife before she reached the age of 12. From 1885 onwards, there was a national spirit in Maharashtra, Punjab, and Bengal. There were serious preparation for revolutionary action. Protestant missions. Protestant missionary work in India began with the Danish missions, which did a great work in Tamil Nadu during the 18th century. But it was William Carey and his colleagues, Marshman and Ward, who first aroused the British, then the Americans and Europeans to the sense of their duty to the non-Christian people of the world. Carey studied Bengali and Sanskrit and translated Bible into Bengali language. It was chiefly by the winning of actual converts from Hinduism through his school, newspapers and literature that he was able to bring Christians effectively to bear on the Hindu mind. Carey, Marshman and Ward supplemented each other in their gifts. They opened boarding schools and orphanages. They did some medical work, especially among the lepers. They were eager to send out native missionaries to preach throughout the country, and a college was opened at Srirampur to train them. The King of Denmark gave authority to confer degrees. They realized that many social and religious reforms were necessary to improve the condition of the people. It was due to the good work done by Carey and his colleagues that in 1813 the British Parliament granted missionaries full freedom to settle and work in India. Soon after this, missionaries from Britain, America, and Europe entered India in large numbers. Apart from missionary societies, a number of individual Europeans also started schools and colleges from Western education in the large city of India. In 1830, Alexander Duff, a Scottish missionary, opened a school in Calcutta for the teaching of English. His work rested on two convictions. First, the highest form of education is Christian education. Second, modern education can be given to the people of India only through English medium because the vernacular languages do not have the books necessary for the purposes. Dove's works opened a new era in India. All the most promising young men of Calcutta flocked to him. Ram Mohan Roy was one of Dove's pupils who brought to Dove some of his earliest pupils. Soon several fine young men joined to the church. Most of the leaders who were later involved in starting modern religious movements were those who had an English education. John Wilson started similar work in Bombay and John Anderson in Madras. Those were followed by other missionaries in other centers. Christian education of women was also pushed forward. For this purpose, a great number of unmarried missionaries arrived in India. From around 1854, work was done among the women shut up in zenanas. Women medical missionaries also came to work with women. Orphanages and widows' homes were opened. Famine relief was carried out to some extent during those years. The work of the great Orientalists. These Orientalists were European scholars who made an object study of Indian literature, art, and architecture. The rise of the Orientalism began with the British attempt to give better government in India, but it did not impress itself on the Indian mind until later. Three men stand out as pioneer Orientalists during the period: Colebrooke, H. Wilson, and Todd Hastings took steps which led Europeans become acquainted with Sanskrit and Hindu religion. By his orders, a simple code of Hindu law was written up and translated into English in 1776. Influenced by the Hastings, Charles Wilkins translated and published in 1789 Shakuntala, the masterpiece of Kalidasa, the greatest Sanskrit dramatist. The years 1828 to 1870 saw the blossoming of Oriental scholarship. Hudson discovered the literature and history of the Veda in 1846, and in collaboration with Bantik, published the great Petersburg lexicon in 1852. Max Muller's text of the Rig Veda was issued between 1848 to 1875. Princip and Cunningham laid the foundation for the researches by Europeans of Indian art, epigraphy, and archaeology. Yet, at this time, the work of Oriental scholars did not influence the Indian mind seriously. Though Oriental studies blossomed before 1870, the fruits were gathered only in the next 30 years. Since 1870, Oriental studies have touched the Indian mind very powerfully. Indian scholars trained in European methods began to render excellent service by editing and translating the texts. Brief survey of four forces. From this brief survey, it is evident that these four forces that entered India from outside paved the way for the social and religious awakening of India in the 19th and 20th century. The Indian people were impressed as follows. First, the Westerners were energetic and active, as contrasted with many Indians who were lethargic. Second, the Westerners were highly disciplined, that they had skill in organization. In India, people were doing things in a haphazard way. Third, the Westerners had scientific outlook, that they gave importance to inventions, equipments, and technology, while in India, people were using age-worn tools. Besides, Indians also had a superstitious outlook. Fourth, Simplicity of the Christian faith with the Bible as the guidebook was the revolutionary factor. In contrast, Hinduism was highly complex religion with unwieldy set of scriptures. The common people knew only the Puranas with their mythological gods and goddesses, which opened the doors to gross idolatry. Fifth, that the Western spirit of nationalism and belief in democratic principle taught that all are equal before the law. In India, caste system was practiced at its worst form. Some were considered high and other low. People had only communal loyalty. There was no spirit of nationalism. Sixth, that there were equality of women in Western society. In India, women were considered inferior to men and they were backward in many respects. Seventh, importance was given to education by the Westerners. They opened schools and colleges for common people. At that time, in India, only the three upper castes were considered eligible for study and their study was not in secular subject. Eighth, that the Western use of the printing press was an effective medium of communication. In India, there were no printing presses. Ninth, that the British had military might and modern equipments of war. This deeply impressed on the minds of the Indian people. At that time, India was not unified as one nation. There were many native states and loyalty was divided. The Indian armies had only traditional weapons of war. Reaction of Indian people to all that they saw of the West was one of admiration. For a time, without discrimination or criticism, people began to copy the West in everything. There was spirit of denationalization and westernization. They felt that in order to make progress, India should imitate the West in all things. Fortunately, this reaction did not last very long. People began to use scientific knowledge to reform themselves in order to get rid of social and religious evil. They understood that social and religious evil, which were detrimental to human welfare, were not decreed by gods but were the self-doing of man. Reformers arose to purge the society of evils. Three types of social and religious reform started. First, compromise. These movements borrowed much from Christianity and kept a few of the Hindu ideas. For example, the Brahmo Samaj. Second, orthodox movements. These attempted to make Hindus more orthodox and went back in history and rejected all the secondary scriptures of Hinduism. For example, Arya Samaj. Third, Hindu reform movements. These observed Western ideas but used them to reform Hinduism from within without even giving credit to the West. Most of the modern religious and secular movements in India are of this type. For example, the Ramakrishna Mission.